made it into vet school, a dream come true. You love the idea of studying anatomy, but right now it's not really loving you back. How are you going to learn all this stuff? You're not even sure you're going to pass, let alone be able to use anatomy to become a confident and capable veterinarian. If any of this rings true for you, my guest today, Dr. Mariane Morin, has some wonderful words of wisdom and encouragement. Welcome to Veterinary Anatomy in Practice. I'm Karina, and joining me today is Dr. Mariane Morin, a French-Canadian vet who now calls Melbourne, Australia, home. Not only is Mariane a compassionate and capable small animal vet, she is also a key contributor to the climate care program by Vets for Climate Action. And because she cares as much about people as she does about animals and the planet, Mariane has also undertaken professional development in leadership and practice management. Plus, she's taken time out of her busy schedule to be with us today to talk about her experience of learning and applying anatomy. Thank you and welcome, Mariane.
Thank you so much for having me. What an intro. That was great. Thank you.
Well deserved. Okay, so let's focus in on vet school and on learning anatomy. I was hoping you would share a little bit with us today about what that experience was like for you.
Well, it wasn't easy. Anatomy was definitely not my friend at the beginning. So I think there was a few factors. It was my first time living, not at home, but also living in a different city. My parents, my family were a bit further away. My boyfriend was in a different city as well. So it was just a lot of changes. And I think
Mm,
I didn't cope very well.
mm,
And anatomy in particular just didn't work well for me. We had two teachers, and one of them just, I don't know, it didn't work for me, the teaching style. And so I actually failed anatomy the first time, and I had to do a repeat exam at
mm.
the end, which, if I'm being very, very honest, I also failed only just. And so I actually had to repeat the entire first year of veterinary school.
That is some dedication right there.
Yeah, it
Wow.
definitely brought a lot of questions, and I really had to sit and ask myself, well, is this the end of the journey for me? Maybe I
Mm.
reached a bit further than what I could actually do, and is this really what I want? And I asked myself, is there any other profession that I might be interested in? And there wasn't really anything. I mean, I wanted to be a vet since I was 7 years old or something like that. And I just thought, nah, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to keep my head down and push through and just get to the end. And I did. 10 years later, still a vet, wasn't it?
How did you go about that process? What did you change? What changed for you? What did you perhaps actively change to help get you through that and to finally succeed in anatomy as a subject?
I think part of it was just the second time around, things were a bit more familiar. Living on my own wasn't such a strange thing anymore. And, somewhere in the back of my mind, I had seen these terms and concepts and ideas
Mhm.
before. So I think that helped a lot. And the second time around, I just tried to study a bit differently, but it still wasn't easy.
Mm.
It's just, there's so many things that you need to learn by heart and can be quite challenging. We had two teachers, and the one that was dealing more with the large animal side of things was really good at giving very concrete examples of, this muscle will be affected in this disease, and that's why you should remember it. And I found that really, really helpful.
So it's creating that context in which to apply a large volume of information. I guess that helps to kind of sort it into some
Absolutely.
logical and meaningful framework.
Yeah, it definitely made a difference for me anyway, just to be able to get a better understanding of why am I learning all of this, and
Yeah.
am I ever going to need this again in the future, or is this just loading my brain for an exam and then forgetting everything. So yeah, having some context, big difference.
Yeah. And speaking of context, welcome Pablo to the conversation.
He just loves to be involved. As you move through the years, the knowledge becomes more and more practical.
Mhm.
And so through other classes, there would be notions of anatomy that would come back and then become a lot more useful in a practical way. And I think it kind of gave me that understanding that, oh, that's why I was learning all this stuff. And, so it kind of reconciled me a bit with it, because I've always been really, really interested in surgery. And so
Ah,
it just
okay.
became more and more obvious why anatomy was important and how it could be useful to do something that I really enjoy.
Uh-huh. Okay. So connecting in with a personal interest,
Definitely.
which leads me nicely into my next question. So after you graduated, I'm curious to know whether anatomy ever kind of re-entered your thinking in a deliberate way. Did it help you to develop your skills and your confidence? So I guess what I'm asking is, did it come to be your friend?
Yeah, I would say it did. It kind of had to be, because it's in our everyday practice, really. It's just everywhere, whether you're more on the medical or the surgical side of things. Anatomy is really the basis of what we do. So it's been, I guess for me, I used it more on the surgical side of things when I wanted to explore new surgeries that I maybe didn't really have anyone to teach me, but I loved it, so I wanted to explore that side of things. And so I would rely on the surgical manuals and then double check the anatomy and make sure I was well prepared for the surgery. So yeah, I think that's when I really became genuinely interested in anatomy, in terms of I could see how beneficial it was. And also, it kind of took the stress out of doing a new surgery, because I felt like I knew what I was doing a little bit more if I knew what the anatomy of the region that I was doing the surgery on was. So that was really
Mhm.
helpful. It kind of helps you avoid mistakes. And especially when you're beginning and you feel a bit more nervous, it just helps.
Mm.
Well, I'm not going to hit anything in that area, because I know I'm not cutting anywhere near something dangerous.
You've actually just reminded me of a question that I find quite interesting, and that is the issue of trauma. Because as vets, if you're dealing with a trauma case, it could affect any part of the body.
True.
So, if I were to just put that to you, would you have any reflections on that observation?
Um, I guess knowing the basics is what matters the most. If you're in a trauma situation, you want to stabilize them, and then once that's done, you buy yourself some time, and you're going to be able to afford a bit of time to go back to your textbook and see, okay, what the next step should be. And I think that's really what's important, is knowing your basics in every area and then going from there and building on that. Because as you move through your years of practice, you'll build on a foundation. And if that foundation is solid, it doesn't matter if you don't know everything when you graduate. It's not possible, and it's not useful anyway. It's too much. As you practice, if you have a solid foundation, then you'll just add to it stuff that is important and relevant to your practice. And I think that's, for me anyway, was the right way to do it.
Mm. Words of wisdom. Are there any areas of anatomy that you'd like to explore further at this stage of your career? Or perhaps can you think of any cases recently where you've done a deep dive into anatomy to assist you in the diagnostic and management process?
Well, definitely from a surgical point of view, it's still something that I use a lot whenever I have, for example, a lump in an area of the body that is maybe a little bit less common. Anything that's cervical or in the perineum area is just there's a lot of structures there, and there can be a lot of complications if you don't really know what you're doing, and long-term complications. So there are areas that I'm interested in developing more because I haven't had the opportunity to do a lot of surgeries around those areas a little bit, and it was a bit stressful but interesting and exciting. So I think that would probably be a really interesting next step.
There's a truism in the veterinary profession that cats are not small dogs. And I'm wondering if you can give us an example from your experience about how that's true in an applied anatomical sense.
Definitely. For me, I would say it shows up a lot in dentistry. Um, from in consultation, whenever you have a look at the mouth, you're not looking for the same kind of diseases, but also it's important to just know the basics, that the dental formula is different and how many teeth there should be in the mouth. If there's a gap, is it normal or is it not? Um, it's important just to know even the shapes of the teeth, and knowing does it look like that because there's been a fracture, or is that the normal shape? And
Mm-hmm.
is there just some gingivitis on this cat, or is there maybe a resorptive lesion? So in the consult room already, it's important to know your anatomy. And then when you go to a dentistry procedure, doing your x-rays, your scale and polish, and then your extractions, there's a ton of implications with the anatomy, and coming to do extractions, and knowing which tooth, where to apply pressure and where not to, so they don't break but they come out as easily as possible. Yes, definitely a lot of anatomical differences that are very important to know. Even talking to owners, if you know with confidence that this is normal anatomy, sometimes they have kind of simple questions that you can just resolve with confidence, because this is just pigmentation, or yes,
Mm.
that tooth is supposed to be shaped like this. And instead of not being sure and doubting yourself, and then the client will lose confidence in you potentially because they feel like you don't seem to know what you're talking about. So even from the client doctor relationship, it really is a big advantage to feel confident about the anatomy.
That is a fantastic point. Thank you very much for raising that.
My pleasure.
It's such an important part of the animal's journey and clinical outcomes, the relationship,
Absolutely.
because it also
It
impacts
makes a big
compliance.
Yes, I was just going to say the same thing. It really will affect compliance. If the owners trust you, they feel like they can trust your recommendations, they're a lot more likely to agree to whatever you recommend and then follow through, which in terms will give a better outcome for the animal, which is what we want.
Thank you so much, Marianne, for sharing your perspectives with us today. It's so inspiring to learn that even if things get off to a rocky start, that you can grow and thrive and become confident in using anatomy to your best advantage. You've already shared so much great wisdom, but I just wondered in closing if you have any last pieces of advice that you might like to give to someone watching today about learning or applying anatomy in clinical practice.
I would say, and this may apply more to students, or just people who are a bit new to anatomy, but I would say don't let it scare you, because it is definitely a lot of material and it can be a bit daunting, but it is something that you will use every single day. There's no way around it. So, best to make it your friend early on. And also, don't put too much pressure on yourself, because it's okay to learn a bunch of stuff and forget it the next day after the exam. It's fine, because ultimately, what you want to remember is the anatomy and how the parts connect to each other. If you forget the names, it's not the end of the world. You can still be a great vet. So just remember why you're learning these things and what part of that learning is actually relevant, and you'll be fine. You'll be great.